Oh, are you, me pretty fair maiden? Oh, are you, me honey? Oh, are you, pretty fair maiden? Oh, are you, me honey? She answered me modestly, I am me mammy's darling, with me to run young father. When you found me the letter of my own, when you come to my certain,
Claire wants to say mass.
I do.
It's a childhood ambition of hers.
Absolutely.
But it's a Sunday and we are in a church, so you know.
I think when history books are written, we'll look back on with the growing battle against the water churches. We often talk about finding the straw that broke the camel's back, but I think we've well found him now.
I wouldn't like to have to go up to Letterkenny and protest to the CEO, you know. Just a little threat that always came in handy over the years. And
As Martin Luther King said, change doesn't roll in on the wheels of inevitability. It only comes through continuous struggle. That's a lesson of all of our histories, and in that sense, seen as women have the most to gain. It's no accident really that women have always been to the forefront of struggle.
But that I always believed, if you want something, you ask for it, and you know, you get it. Well, you make sure you get it.
Always prominent in struggles, in Republican struggles, trade union struggles, battles for social and around economic justice and so on.
There was an article in the Sunday Press about exploitation of women knitters, and it was a woman from Leitrim Ward down the road who had been interviewed and spoke about exploitation by middlemen or agents on the knitting and how the knitting could be much more economically better for the families in the Rosses and elsewhere.
It's against the blessing of the likes of Parnell and his cohorts. They didn't like it, but the reality is they would never have even got as far as they did without the women being involved.
And by the end of 1977, October, so they had decided to form a cooperative to have knitters knit for the cooperative. And immediately they could pay 1/3 more for a knitting sweater than the agents and middlemen were paying.
One of the few groups who were undivided in their opposition to the treaty. There was no messing or pondering on things there. The women were quite clear on what was needed at the time, and they were quite radical, more radical, I would say, in many instances, being a sort of a lesson that once women do get organised, they're pretty hard to control, and I think you had a good example of that earlier, that once they start off there's no stopping them.
The needles, I don't know, I never heard this expression here in the Rosses, but down in Glencollinkill, knitting needles were known as poverty sticks, you know, and there'd been a lot of exploitation, and they put food on the table with the poverty sticks, but they really hate it.
It was women workers who had the first successful strike at Jacobs in 1911, winning a pay rise that really was the flash, the lightning rod that gave the male workers at the time the courage to get organised. The women started a kind of a little bit of sort of, my God, if those L-ones can get that, surely to God we men can get something.
Combat Poverty with a copy to Charlie Haughey saying that we communists in Combat Poverty were leading the simple people of the Rosses astray. That was in 1978, you know.
Women's lives have been sexualised from a very, very young age. We have been seen as, you know, something to be afraid of, something to be hidden. So today, these two women definitely don't hide.
They were fearless, those women. They were the greatest. It was a great privilege and a great part of my life to know them, you know, and we always had a laugh as well, you know.
Not allowing women to take part in the nighttime education course because the topic was woodwork. Now in West Donegal in the early 1970s, I think that was a phenomenal stance to take. That may not seem like the biggest political campaign ever fought or won, but I believe, you know, that for women in West Donegal at that time, that's a landmark case.
131 years and 250 women, and that's what they achieved. And
15 years ago, I would have seen the Congress as this kind of high point, this great moment in left Republican history where left Republicans were trying to find a way of organising, mobilising and intervening into the political realities of their time. And I suppose I would have keenly kind of sought out anything written about it, any documents from the time, to try and see what I could learn, what would be useful from the positive experience of the Congress. And of course, the more I've learnt and the more I've read about it, the more I see the Congress as I suppose, a lesson in abject failure. I always get in trouble for saying what I'm going to say, but it's important to understand, I suppose, what I'm trying to express, that the Fianna Fáil project from 26 to 36 was a really brilliant project. Not in the sense that I supported what it was doing or I shared its political or economic objectives, but as a project of a political party looking to construct a social and popular base for a state-building project. There are really very few examples as successful, not only in European but global history, as Fianna Fáil's.
How do you link the social and the national struggles together? Connolly, do we left a legacy? Connolly articulated that demand that the social and the national were intrinsically linked and could not be separated.
And while I think a lot of left historians have been right to criticise what Fianna Fáil and the De Valera project did in those first kind of 2 decades or so, they've been very poor to understand the basis upon which Fianna Fáil established itself as the hegemonic political and social force in Irish society, obviously alongside the Catholic Church.
And in many ways, the cement that held the Free State together was the Catholic Church, which was the cement that held the state together itself, because the state, in the eyes of many people, was illegitimate. And so I think basically the Catholic Church was the vehicle by which it was used by the ruling elements that emerged, that those elements who are economic elements whose economic interests lay with relationship to Britain.
And the crucial failure was not able to build that alternative project. The tragedy, 60 years of Fianna Fáil domination of the southern state, and I don't need to tell anybody here the implications of all of that.
The programme of Fianna Fáil in the 20s and early 30s was a very radical programme. It consolidated to a degree the limited independence that was achieved. It did achieve certain, to a degree, much more significant economic and social development than what Fine Gael or the Fine Gael government was able to do.
I suppose for me one of the core lessons of this period is neither the IRA themselves, in terms of Mostoomey, Sean McBride or those other key figures, or the left Republicans within the IRA really understood the significance of the change of the political climate, political context, and this new thing which was Fianna Fáil.
You might say in the 1930s it might have been a lot more simpler, in a sense that the enemy at that time was directly British imperialism in the north, and to a degree what we used to call it was the neo-colony in the south. The Republic was the neo-colony of Britain, and the direct colony of the 6 counties under direct control of Britain. So to a degree the politics then were, you may say, a lot simpler. The enemy was much more clearly defined.
And it's really, I suppose, understanding that failure, which is what I want to make some comments on today, and then see what lessons we can draw for progressives and left Republicans and socialists.
Our people are caught up in the triple lock. The triple lock is, in the 6 counties, is the role of the British. In the 26 counties, the triple lock of the European Union and the United States. These 3 forces they control and determine what we can or cannot do. So where is the sovereignty of the people in this process? The political sovereignty of the people, the economic sovereignty of the people. Where does this exist? So these are the big challenges we need to be addressing.
Attacking each other for those differences of strategy and tactics, which, while important, are still nowhere near as big as the need to focus our energies on the people who are causing our problems in the first place. And the water charges campaign we're all currently involved in is a good example of that.
A democracy cannot be established, economic and social justice cannot be established in a society where you do not have economic and social and political control, where those controls lay somewhere else beyond your ability to change and effect change.
Independent of what? Because the reason why the question was posed that way, it implies that politics is about serving or representing interests. Interests. People of interest, people of different classes, like diplomats, they have interests. And the interest of a banker is not the same as the interest of a shop assistant.
I had the opportunity of meeting Peadar O'Donnell on a number of occasions. I first met him back in the late 60s when I was a member of the Connolly Youth Movement. I think it was at a demonstration outside the American Embassy over the war in Vietnam.
I don't know how Peadar O'Donnell would feel, particularly as he said he left expressed wishes for his funeral that there would be no priests, no pomp and no politicians.
And as an alternative, many opted to vote for independent non-party candidates regardless of the politics of the individual candidate. So currently, any candidate described as an independent can benefit from the disaffected section of the electorate.
Wally Fraser would be a right-wing bigot, but because you put that badge independent.
I've never got anybody anything. I've never done anything for anybody, but I have helped people to do it and access services for themselves.
You've nowhere to hide. You have no party system that will bring you in and cover up, and even if they move you sideways or replace you. So I think there's a lot of responsibility on independence.
We were discussing here about the need to cooperate. An indication, and independence of themselves cannot deliver.
Jimmy Gralton never got on well with Peadar and remarked at one stage after he first met him that O'Donnell would like to be the bridegroom at every wedding and the corpse at every funeral. So
it seems to be the focus in my mind of all parties, this rush to what they describe as power. I think independents have a very different view of what power is.
Power. And being in power after the next election. And they're not going to be in power. Whoever is elected in this state or the semi-detached one next door after the next election, they're not going to be in power because they're not the ones who make the key decisions. The decisions were made by a bunch of lads called the Troika that come over here.
Think about that. Think about that. There's no such thing as society only individuals. And what have we got then? Well, how are people operating? How are people thinking? How are they voting? So I think that's what we need to be thinking about. Are we actually following the field set by them?
Years, because change won't come from politicians. Change will come from us, and that means going out on the ground. And as John was saying, that we need to engage more in the community and get the community to ask more questions of what does that actually mean to be independent.
Almost a demand for there was a section of the community that wasn't being represented. As Sinn Féin moved more and more away from the grassroots, there was a large section of the community. Basically, they were ostracised and marginalised too. Because
the left, from a non-Marxist or social democratic or Republican tradition, who may have seen the state as a neutral or benign force in the past, I would suggest that recent events, I think, must surely convince them of the error of their ways.
We managed to get ourselves partially out from under Mother England's poisonous grasp, and now we've got ourselves even bigger and better empires of the European Union and the United States. We're trying to gallop into NATO as quick as we can.
You can't really be independent. You can't be independent. You can't be independent while the debt, we should pay the debt and not pay the debt. You can't be independent while you oppose the European Union and not oppose it.